The story you think you know about the Roloff Farm buyout is just the tip of the iceberg. We've all seen the tension, the arguments, the heartbreaking decision for Amy to sell her half of the property she built and raised her family on. But what if I told you the official story is a carefully constructed lie? What if the number Amy was offered, the number that forced her hand and ultimately led to the deep rift in the family, wasn't just a lowball offer, but the result of a deliberate multi-million-dollar fraud? We have received a series of but highly detailed insider reports that paint a shocking picture of betrayal, greed, and a secret deal designed to cheat Amy Roloff out of her legacy. This isn't just about a business negotiation gone wrong. This is the story of how Caryn Chandler, in a desperate bid to secure her own empire, allegedly orchestrated a sophisticated scheme to steal millions from the mother of Matt's children. This is a story that has been kept under wraps, but the details are starting to leak out. If what we're hearing is true, it will change everything you thought you knew about the final days of the Roloff family farm as we knew it. So buckle up, because this is the LPBW update you won't find anywhere else. And before we dive into the sordid details of this alleged conspiracy, do me a favor. If you believe in uncovering the truth and you want to support our deep dives into the stories that happen when the cameras are off, hit that like button, subscribe to LPBW Update, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single breaking story. You're going to want to be here for all of this. It all started at the sticking point. For months, the buyout negotiation was a deadlocked war of attrition. Publicly, it was presented as a simple disagreement on value. Amy, emotionally and financially invested for over 3 decades, saw the farm for what it was: a thriving, multifaceted business. It wasn't just acres of dirt, it was a brand, a tourist destination, recognized globally, a cash cow during pumpkin season, and the setting of a hit television show. Her valuation, which sources say was well into the high single-digit millions, reflected this reality. She saw the sweat equity, the brand identity she helped build, and the future earning potential. In her eyes, she was selling a piece of a dynasty. Matt, on the other hand, was being heavily influenced by Caryn. He began to parrot a different narrative, one focused on the farm as a simple agricultural property. He started talking about it in terms of raw acreage, operational costs, and the burdens of maintenance. The magic, the brand, the tourist income, all the things he used to champion, were suddenly being downplayed. He accused Amy of being emotional, of overvaluing her memories. Caryn, according to our insider reports, was constantly in his ear, reinforcing this idea. She would allegedly say things like, "She's letting her feelings cloud her judgment, Matt. We have to be realistic. It's just a farm." The constant pressure was working. Matt, eager to end the contentious chapter and move on with his new life with Caryn, began to believe that Amy's price was truly unreasonable. The impasse became a chasm. Neither side would budge. To break the stalemate, they agreed on what seemed like a fair and logical solution. They would hire a neutral, third-party certified appraiser. This expert would assess the property, the business, the brand, and deliver a definitive, unbiased market value. Both Matt and Amy agreed to abide by the findings. It was supposed to be the final word, the objective truth that would allow them to part ways cleanly and fairly. Amy felt a sense of relief. Finally, a professional would see the farm's true worth, validating her position and ensuring she received a fair share of the legacy she had poured her life into. She had no idea that the process she was entrusting her future to was about to be hijacked. This is where the story takes a dark turn. According to our sources, Caryn saw this as a golden opportunity. She volunteered to take the lead in finding the perfect appraiser. She told Matt and Amy, "Let me handle it. I have some contacts. I'll find the best, most reputable person for the job to make sure this is all above board. It sounded helpful, proactive. It was, in fact, the beginning of the alleged conspiracy. Caryn had no intention of finding a reputable firm. Our reports indicate that she immediately bypassed all the well-known, top-tier agricultural and commercial appraisal companies in Oregon. She knew they would come back with a number far too close to Amy's, a number that would empower Amy and drain the farm's capital that Caryn now viewed as her own future. Instead, she allegedly used a discreet back-channel connection, a former business acquaintance with a reputation for creative problem-solving. Through this connection, she was put in touch with a man we'll call Mr. Dalton. Dalton wasn't a top-tier appraiser. He was a freelancer with a spotty record, a man known in certain circles for being flexible if the price was right. He had a state certification, which made him technically legitimate, but his reputation was questionable. There were whispers of past lawsuits, of deals where his appraisals conveniently matched the lowest possible number for a client who needed a tax write-off or a favorable buyout. He was exactly the kind of person Caryn was looking for, plausible on paper, but corruptible in practice. The secret meeting was allegedly set up with the kind of clandestine paranoia you'd see in a spy movie. It wasn't at an office. It was at a dimly lit booth in a truck stop diner, miles away from Roloff territory. Our source, who claims to have knowledge of the arrangement, described the scene in chilling detail. Caryn arrived with a large satchel. Dalton was already there, nursing a coffee. There was no small talk. Caryn laid out the proposition with cold efficiency. She explained that she needed an appraisal for a very specific, high-profile property. She told him there was a contentious divorce situation and that she needed the final number to come in under a very specific ceiling, a number that was millions below even the most conservative estimates of the farm's value. Then came the bribe. Our insider claims Caryn opened the satchel and revealed a thick manila envelope. Inside was a significant amount of cash, tens of thousands of dollars, a bonus for his cooperation. This was the down payment for the fraud. He would receive a second, even larger payment once the deal was done and Amy had signed off based on his report. But the cash wasn't the only tool of this deception. Caryn also handed him a second file. This one contained a doctored set of financial records for the farm. This wasn't an amateurish job. Caryn, having worked for Matt for years, had intimate knowledge of the farm's books. She knew exactly which numbers to manipulate. The fraudulent records she allegedly provided to Dalton were a masterclass in creative accounting. Pumpkin season revenue, the farm's biggest moneymaker, was systematically underreported. For example, she took the figures from a year with unusually bad weather and presented them as a typical season's earnings. High-margin items like the private tours, corporate event rentals, and merchandise sales were either completely omitted or their profits drastically reduced. On the expense side, she did the opposite. Normal maintenance costs were inflated. She allegedly fabricated invoices for major equipment repairs and emergency structural work that never happened. She created a paper trail that painted a picture of a struggling, barely profitable farm, a charming but financially draining hobby, rather than the lucrative tourist enterprise it truly was. She was handing him a pre-written script, a fraudulent foundation upon which he could build his fraudulent report. Dalton, seeing the cash on the table and the meticulously crafted false evidence, smiled and agreed. The deal was struck. A few weeks later, the fraudulent report arrived. It was a work of art in its own right, bound in a professional blue cover filled with charts, graphs, and official-looking jargon. It looked every bit the part of a legitimate expert analysis. Dalton had done his job well. The final valuation was shocking. millions less than what Amy believed was fair and conveniently just under the ceiling Caryn had dictated. To justify this absurdly low number, the report was filled with carefully selected lies and half-truths. It cited a general downturn in the agri-tourism market, a completely fabricated trend. It spoke of decreased agricultural viability due to supposed soil degradation, ignoring the farm's consistent bumper crops. It highlighted potential zoning challenges that were non-existent and exaggerated the impact of local competition. The most damning part of the report, the part that was a blatant and intentional falsehood, was the section on brand value. The Roloff brand, the name recognition from a globally syndicated television show that had been running for over a decade, the very thing that drew hundreds of thousands of visitors and millions of dollars in revenue, was valued at zero. Dalton's report dismissed it as intangible and non-transferable goodwill, a meaningless footnote. It was the equivalent of appraising Coca-Cola and valuing the brand at zero. It was a lie so audacious, so fundamentally dishonest, that it should have been an immediate red flag. For Matt, however, it was the answer he wanted to hear. He was tired of the fighting, tired of the emotional turmoil. The report, slick and professional, validated the narrative Caryn had been feeding him for months. It confirmed his manufactured belief that Amy was being unreasonable. He saw the official letterhead, the appraiser's signature and certification number, and he accepted it. "See, Amy," he likely said, holding the document like a shield. "This is what the expert says. It's not me, it's the market. This is the number." He wanted the process to be over, and this report was his ticket out. The possibility that Caryn, his partner, his trusted confidant, could be capable of such a profound betrayal simply did not enter his mind. Amy was blindsided. When she saw the number, her heart sank. It felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just low. It was insulting. It was a valuation that erased 30 years of her life, her work, her identity. She knew in her bones that it was wrong. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was a lie. But how could she fight it? Here was a thick, detailed report from a certified professional. It was filled with language she didn't fully understand, data she couldn't easily refute. Matt was holding it up as gospel. To argue against it made her look once again like the emotional one, the one who couldn't accept reality. She felt trapped, cheated, and utterly powerless. The expert report was a cage, and the door was slamming shut on her. This is where the story could have ended, with Amy reluctantly accepting a fraction of what she was owed, with Caryn and Matt securing the farm for a steal, and with the truth buried forever under a pile of fraudulent paperwork. But they made one critical miscalculation. They forgot about Chris Marek. Chris, with his quiet demeanor, is often underestimated, but Chris has a long and successful career in real estate. He's not a farmer, but he knows property, he knows valuations, and he knows a scam when he sees one. When Amy showed him the report, her face a mask of defeat and confusion, Chris didn't just offer a comforting word. He asked to see the document. That night, while Amy slept, Chris sat at the kitchen table with a highlighter and a calculator, and he began to read. And the more he read, the angrier he became. It didn't take a forensic accountant to see the flaws. It just took a professional eye. The first thing that jumped out at him were the comparable properties, or comps. This is a standard part of any appraisal, where the appraiser compares the subject property to similar ones that have recently sold. The comps Dalton cited were, to put it mildly, a joke. Chris, with a few clicks on his laptop, could see it instantly. One comp was a foreclosed dairy farm in a different county with severe soil contamination issues. Another was a property not zoned for commercial or tourist activity, making any comparison to Roloff Farms completely invalid. A third was a fraction of the size and located miles from any major highway. Dalton hadn't found comparable properties. He had cherry-picked, distressed, irrelevant properties, to artificially drag down the value. It was a classic amateur hour fraud technique that a layman might miss, but to a real estate professional like Chris, it was a glaring red siren. Then he got to the financial analysis. He saw the conveniently low revenue numbers and the absurdly high expenses. He didn't have access to the real books, but he had common sense. He knew what a successful pumpkin patch in Oregon could generate. He knew the kind of money a TV-famous location could command for events. The numbers in the report didn't just seem low, they seemed impossible. And then he landed on the most egregious lie of all. The brand value, 0. Chris knew that the Roloff brand was arguably the farm's single most valuable asset. It was the engine that drove the entire business. To assign it a value of 0 was not just an oversight, it was a deliberate, malicious act of deception. He closed the report, the glossy cover feeling cheap and dirty in his hands. He went to Amy the next morning, his expression grim. He sat her down and laid it all out piece by piece. He showed her the fraudulent comps on his laptop. He explained the absurdity of the financial claims. He pointed to the $0 brand valuation and told her exactly what it meant. "Amy," he said, his voice firm but full of conviction, "this isn't an appraisal. This is a work of fiction. It's a document that was created with one purpose and one purpose only, to steal from you." For the first time in weeks, Amy felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't crazy. Her gut feeling was right. She had been cheated, but now she had someone in her corner who could prove it. The conversation that followed was a major turning point. Chris didn't just get angry, he got strategic. He told Amy they couldn't just argue, they needed to fight fire with fire, or, more accurately, fight lies with truth. He told her, "We need our own report. We need to hire the best, no questions asked. We need an appraisal so thorough, so respected, that it completely demolishes this piece of garbage." There was one problem: money. A top-tier commercial and agricultural appraisal for a property as complex as Roloff Farms would cost a small fortune, easily tens of thousands of dollars. It was money they would have to pay out of their own pocket with no guarantee of getting it back. It was a massive gamble. If, for some reason, the new appraisal came in low, she would be out the money and her negotiating position would be destroyed forever. This is where we must delve into some of the exclusive theories our sources are reporting, pieces of the puzzle that happen behind the scenes. Our first theory centers on Matt's state of mind. Was he a willing participant in this fraud, or was he a victim as well? The overwhelming consensus from our insiders is that Matt was not a co-conspirator. He was, as one source put it, the perfect mark. He was emotionally exhausted from the divorce, desperate to begin his new life with Caryn, and had a known blind spot when it came to trusting her judgment in business matters. Caryn allegedly exploited this, playing the role of the supportive, business-savvy partner who was just trying to protect him from Amy's unrealistic demands. He was, in essence, a pawn in Caryn's game, a tool she used to legitimize the fraud. His acceptance of the report wasn't born of malice towards Amy, but of a deep-seated desire for the conflict to end and a profound, misplaced trust in his new partner. The eventual revelation of Caryn's deceit would be for him a world-shattering betrayal. Our second exclusive theory concerns the cash for the kickback. Where did Caryn get a 5-figure sum of untraceable cash? This wasn't something you could just withdraw from an ATM. We're hearing reports that Caryn had been quietly liquidating some of her own pre-mat assets in the months leading up to the appraisal. A small stock portfolio, some jewelry, things that wouldn't raise any red flags on any shared financial statements with Matt. She was allegedly building a secret war chest, a fund to be used for this exact purpose. It shows a level of premeditation that is truly chilling. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a calculated, long-term plan to seize control of the farm by any means necessary. She was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. This brings us back to Amy and Chris sitting at their kitchen table, facing a monumental decision. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was to accept the lie and walk away with millions less than she deserved. It was a choice between her financial security and a quiet but unjust peace. At that moment, Amy Roloff made the decision that would change everything. She looked at Chris, the man who believed in her and saw the truth when she was being gaslit into doubting herself, and she agreed. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's hire them." The very next day, Chris made the call. He didn't go for a mid-level firm. He went straight to the top, to one of the most respected and expensive agricultural appraisal firms in the entire Pacific Northwest. These were the experts that banks and courts trusted for high-stakes litigation and nine-figure property deals. He explained the situation without naming names and formally commissioned a new full-scale appraisal of Roloff Farms. He requested the most comprehensive report they offered, one that would include a deep dive forensic analysis of the business's financials, a certified brand valuation, and a projection of future earnings. The gears of justice, expensive as they were, began to turn. They had fired their first real shot back at the conspiracy. Now, all they could do was wait for the second report to arrive, a report that they prayed would hold the truth, and with it, the power to expose the entire fraudulent scheme. The clock was ticking, and the stage was being set for a confrontation that would tear the Roloff family apart once and for all. The weeks that followed were a torment of anxious silence for Amy and Chris. They had taken a monumental risk, spending a significant sum of their own money on a second opinion, a gamble that could either be their salvation or their final undoing. Every day that passed without news from the new appraisal firm felt like a year. Was her gut feeling wrong? Had Chris, in his desire to defend her, seen a conspiracy where there was only a harsh business reality? The doubt was a poison, seeping into the hope that had so recently been kindled. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, it arrived. Not in a simple manila envelope like Dalton's flimsy report, but in a heavy courier-delivered box. It felt substantial, important. It felt like the truth. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Chris had first dissected the fraudulent report, and looked at the box. This was it, the moment of truth. With trembling hands, Amy sliced open the packing tape. Inside were two thick, spiral-bound volumes. The cover was simple, elegant, bearing the crest of the prestigious firm. It was the polar opposite of Dalton's cheap-looking document. Chris took one volume, Amy the other. They flipped past the introductory pages, the methodologies, the disclaimers, searching for the one page that mattered most, the final valuation. Chris found it first. His eyes scanned the page and he froze. He looked up at Amy, his expression unreadable for a second, before a slow, wide smile spread across his face. He turned the book around and pushed it across the table. Amy looked down and the breath caught in her throat. The number staring back at her was almost unbelievable. It wasn't just higher than Dalton's valuation. It wasn't just $1 million or $2 million more. It was nearly double. The number she had held in her heart, the one Matt and Caryn had mocked as emotional and unrealistic, was not only justified, it was conservative. The report had validated every instinct she had. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't greedy. She was right. Tears of relief and vindication streamed down her face. For months, she had been gaslit, made to feel small and foolish, but in her hands, she held the proof. She held the truth. As they spent the next few hours poring over the details, the sheer scale of the first appraiser's fraud became sickeningly clear. This new report was a masterpiece of due diligence. The section on comparable properties didn't list distressed dairy farms. It listed thriving, profitable agritourism businesses and wineries in the region, properties with similar brand recognition and visitor traffic. The financial analysis was a forensic deep dive. The appraisers had used industry standard models to project future revenue from pumpkin season, tourism, and media licensing, concluding the farm was a highly profitable and growing enterprise. And then there was the brand valuation. The new report dedicated an entire 30-page section to the Roloff name. It analyzed the television show's global reach, the social media engagement, the built-in multi-generational audience. It quantified the goodwill Dalton had dismissed as worthless. The final figure they assigned to the brand alone was worth more than half of Dalton's entire valuation for the property. Laying the two reports side by side was like comparing a child's crayon drawing to a Rembrandt. One was a sloppy, transparent forgery. The other was a detailed, evidence-based assessment of reality. The joy Amy felt began to curdle into a cold, hard anger. This wasn't just a mistake or a difference of professional opinion. This was a calculated, multi-million-dollar attempt at theft. They had the what? The fraudulent report. They had proof that it was a lie. But they still needed to prove the why. They needed to forge an unbreakable chain of evidence that led directly from the corrupt appraiser, Mr. Dalton, right to Caryn Chandler's front door. This is where Chris Marek truly stepped into the role of protector and strategist. His decades in the real estate world meant he knew the dark underbelly of the business. He knew that a crooked appraiser like Dalton wouldn't risk his license and potential jail time for a standard fee. There had to be a kickback, a big one, and there had to be a way to find it. Arguing with Matt using just the second report wouldn't be enough. He would claim they just shopped for a number they liked. They needed something more. They needed irrefutable proof of a conspiracy. And this brings us to another exclusive theory we've been hearing from our sources, a detail that has never been made public. Amy and Chris didn't try to play detective on their own. They understood they were out of their depth, dealing with a level of deceit that required professionals. Using more of their own money, they allegedly hired a private investigator. Not just any PI, but a discreet, highly recommended forensic investigator who specialized in financial fraud. They gave him everything they had: Dalton's name, a copy of his fraudulent report, and the timeline of events. His mission was simple: find the dirt, find the connection, find the money. The investigator, a man we'll call Mr. Kane, got to work immediately. The first thing he did was a deep dive into Dalton's professional history. What he found was a pattern. Dalton was a bottom feeder who preyed on contentious situations. Kane uncovered records of 2 prior lawsuits from messy partnership dissolutions, both alleging fraudulent undervaluation. Both cases had been quietly settled out of court for a significant sum, with the records sealed. He also found 2 formal complaints filed against Dalton with the State Appraisal Board, both of which had been mysteriously withdrawn just before a hearing was scheduled. This was a man who knew how to operate in the gray areas of the law, a man who was an expert at getting paid to make problems go away, or in this case, to create them. But the professional history was just background noise. Kane knew the real story, as always, would be in the money. Gaining access to someone's personal bank records is notoriously difficult, but a skilled PI has methods, legal and quasi-legal, of tracking financial footprints. Kane focused on Dalton's known bank accounts, looking for any unusual activity in the weeks surrounding the appraisal. And then he found it, the smoking gun. Just 2 days after the alleged secret meeting between Caryn and Dalton at the truck stop diner, records showed a cash deposit into Dalton's personal checking account. It was a massive amount, tens of thousands of dollars. The deposit was made in cash, structured across several transactions to avoid triggering automatic federal reporting requirements, a classic money laundering technique. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. This had to be the kickback. Kane kept digging. He then found a second, even larger cash deposit made the day after Dalton's fraudulent report was officially delivered to Matt and Amy. This was clearly the final payment, the reward for a job well done. The untraceable cash was the key. It was a clumsy, arrogant mistake. Caryn and Dalton likely thought that by using cash, they were leaving no trail. But what they failed to realize is that a sudden, massive infusion of cash into a bank account is, in itself, a giant red flag. It's a trail all its own. To bolster the evidence, Kane's team even pulled cell phone tower data. While not a perfect science, the data was able to place burner phones registered to shell companies, which he had traced back to both Dalton and, incredibly, a P.O. box used by Caryn for her personal business dealings, in the same vicinity of the truck stop diner on the night of the alleged meeting. The private investigator compiled his findings into a thick, damning dossier. It contained Dalton's shady professional history, the sealed lawsuit summaries, the bank statements with the highlighted cash deposits, and the cell tower location data. He delivered the package to Chris and Amy. As they read through it, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. They now had a complete, irrefutable narrative of the crime. They had the fraudulent report, the legitimate report that exposed the lies, and now the PI's file that exposed the criminal conspiracy and the money trail leading back to the source. They had everything they needed. It was time for the confrontation. Choosing the venue for this confrontation was critical. It couldn't be a public place. It couldn't be a neutral office. It had to be somewhere with weight, with history. They chose the place where it all began and was now ending, the original farmhouse. Amy called Matt and told him they needed to have a final meeting about the buyout, that she had some new information to consider. She insisted Caryn not be present, framing it as a private family matter between the two of them, the co-founders of the farm. Matt, likely assuming Amy was coming to finally surrender, agreed. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush of the truth. He arrived at the farmhouse with a weary arrogance, the air of a man who believed he had already won. He probably expected more tears, more emotional appeals. He sat down at the familiar dining room table, the site of countless family meals and tense discussions. "Okay, Amy," he likely started, his tone patronizing. "What is it? I hope you're finally ready to accept the appraiser's number so we can all move on with our lives." Amy didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She and Chris, a silent, imposing presence at her side, simply began to lay the evidence on the table. First, Amy slid the 2 bound volumes of the legitimate appraisal in front of him. "Before we discuss that number, Matt, I want you to see this. This is what a real appraisal looks like." Matt likely scoffed, pushing it aside without even opening it. "Oh, come on. You went out and paid someone to give you the number you wanted. It doesn't mean anything. We agreed to a neutral appraiser. That's the binding report." "He wasn't neutral, Matt," Chris said, his voice low and steady. And with that, he placed the private investigator's dossier on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. He opened it and turned it to face Matt. "We looked into the man Caryn hired." For the next 10 minutes, they walked him through it, piece by agonizing piece. They showed him the history of lawsuits against Dalton. They showed him the comparison of the fraudulent comps versus legitimate ones. Matt's smug demeanor began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. But he held firm, clinging to his denial. "This is just circumstantial. You're trying to smear a good man's name." And then Chris slid the final pieces of paper across the table. "The bank statements," he pointed to the first highlighted entry. "This, Matt, is a cash deposit for $50,000 into your appraiser's account, made 2 days after Caryn met with him. And this," he said, pointing to the second entry, "is another $75,000 in cash, deposited the day after you received his report." Matt stared at the papers. You could see the wheels turning in his head, the desperate search for an alternative explanation. It could be anything. A lottery win, an inheritance. You can't prove where that money came from, he stammered, his voice rising in panic. Amy looked at him, her eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound sadness. Matt, stop. Just stop. Who found the appraiser? Who volunteered to handle it all? Who was so secretive about the process? Who has been whispering in your ear for months that I was being greedy and emotional? And that was it. The dam of his denial broke. In that horrifying moment, the truth crashed down on Matt Roloff. It wasn't just about the bank statements or the lawsuits. It was the sudden, sickening clarity with which he saw the last 6 months of his life. Every conversation with Caryn about the farm's value, her dismissive attitude towards Amy's concerns, her strange insistence on finding the appraiser herself, her coached him on what to say, her constant reassurances that she was just trying to protect their future. He had been her puppet. He was the one who had bullied his ex-wife, the mother of his 4 children, accusing her of being irrational, all while his fiancée was orchestrating a criminal conspiracy behind his back. The woman he loved, the woman he had chosen over his family, had not only lied to him, but had used him as a weapon in a multi-million-dollar fraud. The color drained from his face. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it left him breathless. He wasn't just a victim, he was an accomplice, a willing fool in his own downfall. What happened in the immediate aftermath of that confrontation is shrouded in secrecy, but our sources have pieced together the most plausible scenario. There were no immediate calls to the police. There was no public explosion. That's not how the Roloffs operate. A scandal of this magnitude involving fraud and a secret kickback would have destroyed the family's carefully crafted public image, ended the show, and invited a federal investigation. Instead, a new secret negotiation took place. This is our final and most crucial exclusive theory, the cover-up. Faced with irrefutable proof, Matt was cornered. He couldn't defend Caryn. He couldn't deny the evidence. So a deal was struck in the shadows. The fraudulent appraisal was metaphorically torn up. Amy received a final buyout price that was much, much closer to the legitimate appraisal, a number that allowed her to comfortably buy her new home and secure her future. In exchange for this financial justice, she and Chris agreed to a vow of absolute silence. The story of the corrupt appraiser, the kickback, and Caryn's conspiracy would be buried. The official narrative would remain a simple, if contentious, disagreement over price. It was a deal made to prevent mutual assured destruction. This secret cover-up, our sources insist, is the key to understanding everything that happened next. It explains the sudden, bizarre turn in Matt's behavior regarding the farm. Viewers were mystified. Why, after all the talk of a legacy for his children, did he suddenly make it impossible for Zach or Jeremy to buy it? Why were his asking prices so astronomically high? Why did he seem so emotionally volatile about the property? The common assumption was that it was about greed. But the truth, according to our theory, is far more complex and tragic. For Matt, the farm was no longer a legacy. It was a crime scene. It was a constant, glaring reminder of Caryn's betrayal and his own humiliating gullibility. Every acre was tainted by the fraud she had been willing to commit to possess it. His erratic behavior wasn't about squeezing his sons for every last penny. It was a manifestation of his own internal conflict. How could he sell his sons a legacy that was built on such a toxic foundation of deceit? His impossible demands and sky-high prices weren't a negotiation tactic. They were a subconscious form of self-sabotage, a way to keep his children away from a property that had become a symbol of the deepest wound in his life. He couldn't sell them the farm because the farm was poison, And so the story we all saw on television was the sanitized, carefully edited version of events. The real story, the one of fraud, betrayal, and a secret cover-up, played out behind closed doors. Amy walked away with her financial justice, but with the painful knowledge of what Caryn was capable of. Matt was left to live with the woman who had so profoundly betrayed him, their relationship now forever shadowed by this unforgivable secret. And the farm, the heart of the family, remains in a state of limbo, a monument to a crime that was never prosecuted and a betrayal that was never publicly acknowledged. The rift in the Roloff family wasn't caused by a simple sale. It was caused by a secret so dark and so deep that it shattered the very foundation of their trust, perhaps forever. What do you think? Does this insider story finally explain the bizarre and heartbreaking final chapter of the Roloff family farm? Is this the missing piece that makes Matt's actions finally make sense? Let me know your theories in the comments section below. And if you believe there's more to the story than what the cameras show us, make sure you are subscribed to LPBW Update with the notification bell on, because we are always digging for the truth and the secrets of Roloff Farms are far from over.